Deputy Mattie McGrath.
Count Corla. The Health Regulation Termination of Pregnancy Bill 2018. I'm glad to be able to speak to it here this evening. The bill that we are due to debate, and I use the term very loosely, represents a moral, political and humanitarian catastrophe, in my opinion. It is now absolutely clear that we have decided to anchor our understanding of human dignity in a culture of vicious political supremacy of the strong over the weak. We have done so fully aware that wherever such legislation as this is introduced, it soon generates a momentum that makes further liberalisation almost impossible to resist. We have seen that process begin already. Yesterday morning, the abortion lobbying and taxpayer-funded National Women's Council sent all members of the Oireachtas an email urging us and members to submit amendments deleting sections 5 and 6 from the bill before us today. These are sections of the bill that deal with offences, either by individuals or by corporate body or institutions. Let us be clear about what the NWCI finds so offensive. The very first line of section 5 is, "It shall be an offence for a person by any means whatsoever to intentionally end the life of the fetus." According to this logic, it is a sign of intolerable restriction to have the bill make any provision for offences to be committed whatsoever. They and their supporters clearly want the practice of abortion to be removed entirely from the scope of legal penalties. This is a scandal. It is also a clear sign that the provisions of the bill would be absolutely resisted by the abortion rights extremists. The Minister, and I'm sorry to see that he just left, the Minister in his usual doublespeak, so I'm not talking to you, Minister, I mean Minister Harris, in his usual doublespeak, pleaded with us, the members of this House, to make life as easy as possible for him and not to resist the bill or seek to amend it. And he couldn't wait for my contribution. That will tell you how tolerant he is. He sent a rather embarrassed Government Chief Whip to the Oireachtas Business Committee last week with a demand that we waive pre-legislative scrutiny on this bill. And I was quite shocked, and I resisted that to the best of my ability as a member of that business committee on behalf of the Rural Independent Group. Yet the very same morning, he was reported in the Irish Examiner as saying that there is a duty on all of us who are honoured enough to sit in the Dáil and the Senate to scrutinise the legislation and ask questions on the legislations. I would have thought that would be, go without stating it, a prerequisite for any piece of legislation. We have had this pre-leg scrutiny now for some time, and it has proved very successful. And on that issue, we absolutely agree that we have to scrutinise and examine legislation and ask questions and put forward amendments. It's our duty. However, I believe, unlike the Minister, that bills of the nature and gravity of the one being proposed must be subjected to the parliamentary process of pre-legislative scrutiny, and very rigorously put there as well. That's what it's for, and that makes good legislation and takes out the pitfalls. His fear and his unwillingness to submit the abortion bill to in-depth scrutiny speak to an implicit acceptance that the bill is fundamentally flawed on several levels. Why else would he not want to have, as I said, the people have spoken, and he has a job of work to do. But why would he try and rush that? Indeed, other individuals wanted to have us sit late tonight and sit tomorrow to rush it through. I mean, we make haste slowly here. It's a very, very serious piece of legislation. But I cannot fathom why the Minister was afraid to have this piece of legislation. Some are drafting it and building on the heads of the bill, which were put before the people, just the heads. Why would he not want to have an in-depth scrutiny of this bill, like many other pieces of legislation? We have enough of bad legislation, and legislation being loopholes found in it and being brought before the courts and challenged constitutionally, and other negative impacts of legislation without a proper impact analysis studied first. And I believe that the pre-leg scrutiny is a wonderful area for that, and it should be. And I will go on. It makes a mockery of authentic conscientious protection rights, and it tramples over the many professional concerns that exist around the absence of ultrasound technology to determine gestational age. This makes a mockery of it. And GPs up and down the country know that. They know how limited they are, and they know how much pressure they are under with the FIMPI cuts and the whole issue of GPs leaving the country. And now this makes a pure mockery of it. I will return to these issues shortly. An exhaustive analysis performed by the Oireachtas Library and Research Service last year clearly showed that pre-legislative scrutiny has, and I quote, a proven record of influencing a bill's content before it is entrenched and providing a locus of guidance for parliamentarians like myself and anybody else, demonstrating its value as a significant contributor towards the development of better legislation. And we all the time here, and goodness knows we have enough of faults in the HSE and with the HSE, and enough of clamour and some serious scandals of huge proportions. The latest one is with the cervical cancer and many others. Surely we would, this piece of sensitive legislation around healthcare for women, young and old, but young mainly, and that we would have it pre-leg scrutiny, and we would make sure and ensure that every parliamentarian had a chance and the pre-leg scrutiny was done, and that we would have a robust piece of legislation that wasn't flippant. So I can't understand his double-speak when he says, reported as saying the examiner wanted full and full and protracted scrutiny, and then he sends his chief whip, or the government sent the chief whip in to our business committee to ask us to move to bypass and to do away with pre-leg scrutiny and this piece of very important legislation. In light of the statements, it's impossible to tell why Minister Harris sought the waiver, and his government, but him especially, he sought a waiver from the pre-leg scrutiny. The only explanation might be that Minister Harris, he wants his legislative trophy more than he wants good law. And that has to be a question put to him. It must be the true situation, Minister of State. He wants his legislative trophy more than he wants good law. We have enough of bad law in many areas across our economy, and when we have a system now to scrutinise law, we should use it and not treading on it and bypassing it. I want to be absolutely clear. To my mind, this is a bill that ignores fundamental freedoms, annihilates the first principles of medicine, and levies upon the conscience and purse of a nation unjust taxes to support it. Indeed, we're all worn out at this stage from pre-budget lobbying and pre-budget meetings, and we see how difficult it is and how scarce resources are, from healthcare right across to all walks of life, and to see then that we have no problem when it comes to finance for this. But people know out there. People are waiting for the cataracts for 4 and 5 years, going blind. The people are waiting for the hips and the orthodontic treatment for the kids. The young families with the young adolescents can't get into CAMS service. And the amount of mental health stress and trauma and pressures that are there and that, and not to mention the trolley crisis. No, the real situations. To question it, the bill, or to amend it, is to seek parliamentary scrutiny of its provisions, is to mark yourself out as an enemy of progress. I want to totally state that I'm no enemy of progress whatsoever, and we must listen to the people who have voted. If accepting the erosion of fundamental rights is progress, then I want no part of it. Fundamental rights that were always enshrined, I want no part of it, if that's supposed to be progress. There is no doubt that this bill will live long in the memory of the chief political legacy of a Minister for Health and a government that gleefully offered up the protection of the smallest and most vulnerable in return for their entry to a dehumanising and debasing ideological cartel. There are widespread problems with the bill, from the terrifying definition of a fetus as an embryo or a fetus during the period of time commencing after the implantation in the uterus of a woman, the ending of the complete emergence of the fetus from the body of the woman. What does this definition or this understanding, where does this definition or this understanding exist in the real world, I ask? Does anyone here seriously believe that he is not setting the legislative groundwork for late-term abortions? Couldn't be more clear to me. Of course it is. From the briefing the Minister gave yesterday, which I was unable to attend but my PA attended, I understand that there is absolutely zero possibility of any real and meaningful conscientious protection, either for medical personnel or for medical institutions coming into force. Absolutely zero. This is guaranteed to create a major conflict within the GP and hospital system. And I'd like to say at this point that I worked very hard during the programme for government in the talks, and I had the help of my staff and indeed my own daughter. I hope that to try and have perinatal hospice introduced. And I hope that there will be as much zeal to support women who face a crisis, and I want all supports necessary to help them keep their babies and carry on with their pregnancy. Support such as perinatal hospice care being introduced right across the country. And that was promised in the programme for government, Minister, and you as a junior Minister of Health and the Minister, I've seen very little introduction of it in the 2.5 years since, over 2 years since your government has been formed. Also, housing supports for lone parents supports, supports for families of children with disabilities, and improved maternity services. So badly needed. And I want to salute the services in the paediatric ward in Tipperary who are getting an award tomorrow night, and indeed maternity services, many awards they receive. But they're under such pressure, and they're so short-staffed, and the nurses leaving the service and not being able to track them is having a huge negative impact on what they do day in, day out with excellent track records. Just last week we read about the huge extra costs that families of children with life-limiting conditions face with little or no support. Children with autism and many other health issues. As a pro-life deputy, I will continue to fight for these supports, and I hope that the Minister and his government will be open to fully supporting all women who need extra support to get through whatever crisis may face them. From the briefing the Minister gave yesterday, the possibility of meaningful change looks like zero. This is guaranteed to create a major conflict, as I said, with GPs and our hospital systems. It will, regardless of the weasel-worded definition used in the bill, trample over the sincerely held beliefs of doctors who do not want to play any hand act or part in the destruction of an innocent life. Yesterday we all received an email from the Doctors for Conscience. It contained a copy of the letter sent to Mr. Fintan Fye, CEO of the Irish College of General Practitioners, and signed by 203 Irish medical doctors. Not 2, not 12, not 50, not 100, but 203. Many more are afraid to sign it because the contracts are up for renewal and renegotiation and all that goes with that, and the implicit threats. It included the following, this email from the 203 doctors. We are writing to express our profound concerns that the ICGP has not made the issue of freedom of conscience a central part of its consultation with GPs regarding the government's proposed new legislation on abortion. There is no question but that this is the standout issue for GPs, and the ICGP board knows this to be the case. And when I met the IMO last week in the pre-budget, I had this discussion with them also. And you know, they don't want to talk about it. They just want to take whatever diktat they get from the Minister and Department and run with it. But that is no solace to the many GPs, hundreds of them, who are out there and who are fiercely conflicted by what has been foisted upon them. The Minister for Health is tasking GPs with the provision of an abortion service without first asking GPs on the ground if they think their surgeries are an appropriate setting. Neither was the question asked in the recent ICGP online survey. So what are we afraid of? Why don't we deal with the real issues? We have issue after issue been foisted on the under-6s and the under-12s healthcare and the practice of GPs that we all know on our own. That is, they're out the doors because the hospital A&Es are just so full. They're out the doors with patients trying to get in. New patients can't be taken on by most GPs, and they have to wait maybe a week, maybe 8 days. And I salute the GPs. They're working under awful pressure. And one of them sitting behind me here, Deputy Dr. Michael Hartley. He knows more than anybody the pressures, and especially and more so on rural GPs and trying to keep them. And I thank you, Councillor Corlin, for giving me a topical issue later on to deal with a rural practice in County Waterford in my own parish. This question wasn't asked in the recent ICGP online survey either. Why would they not ask the question? What are they afraid of? Getting the wrong answer. You're no doubt, you are no doubt fully appraised, Minister, and Minister Harris as well, of the recent online survey, like the one of the GP Buddy.ie, where 75% of the 936 registered GPs who took part were opposed to GP-led abortion service. 75%, not 25, not 10, not 15, 50, 75% of the 936. That's not a message. And still you continue bulldozing it along without any consultation or any meaningful interaction with them. The Minister knows this kind of letter from over 200 doctors does not give you cause for concern, cause to pause, cause to have pre-legislative scrutiny, and cause to make haste slowly with this serious legislation. Does it not provide you, Minister, with a moment's hesitation about the nature of what you are proposing to force upon dedicated men and women who have given their professional lives to Irish people and the Irish healthcare system? And we see that in a rural GP's practice as 24/7. As they live in the community, they're part of the community. And the Dr. Hertig got elected here in the slogan, no GP, no doctor, no village. And that's very, very true out there. If this Minister cares to know, if he cares to go out from the leafy suburbs out to the country and see what goes on. And above all, a professional organisation like the GPs, to treat them like this, to face different issues on this is about the third or fourth in recent times, when they're suffering from cuts from FIMPI of almost 40%, and they've been decimated. Clearly, it has not given you, Minister, any your cause to pause for thought. And I beg of you, Minister, and your senior minister, to just have cause for pausing, have reflection, and treat these GPs with respect, and the nurses in their practices, and indeed all the other healthcare providers who have conscientious objections. Treat them with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, having joined that career and having their vocation and having qualified and having many, many decades of service in many areas. On another aspect of the bill, Minister, I must say that I find it absolutely horrifying to think that you are even contemplating removing parental consent before a child obtains an abortion, that you're removing the parental consent. And we were here recently trying to bring up the age of, of different things for children, for cyberbullying and everything else, so this flies in the face of all that. As I understand it, you did not rule this option out at the briefing yesterday. Will you rule it in here today, Minister? But you're not here to answer me. Minister, I could stand here and try and persuade you that the very humanity of the unborn child should be reason enough to cry halt to this truly barbaric piece of legislation. But it is clear that such an approach is utterly pointless. Utterly pointless. You and your supporters have been totally captured by a vicious logic which pays no heed to the most vulnerable in our society, the unborn child. No heed whatsoever. If you had this piece of legislation, it wouldn't be as desperate as it is. You have closed your ears and your eyes to the reality of the unborn child as a member of the human family, fully deserving our protection and indeed our care. I will be making amendments to this bill with a number of my colleagues like many other deputies who indicated that point to you during the briefing yesterday. Various amendments from different viewpoints, but I certainly will be making them, and I certainly hope that the rush and the eagerness to have this rushed through and bypass pre-led scrutiny, that we will have time on this floor, time at committee, time when it goes back from committee for reasoned debate here, and have a proper discussion and debate. I hope that the amendments will be listened to and won't be scoffed at and won't be persuaded as backward people or whatever else. I will continue to try and sanitise the brutal tool that we have before us, and to give some help to the many doctors and the hundreds of thousands of people who voted no on the referendum also. We cannot just forget about those, because one side won, and definitely it did win, clear, but there's a sizable proportion of our population who are very, very concerned. We know that many of those who voted yes did so with huge reluctance. Indeed, I've been contacted by quite a number of those in recent times, and we all have, that they didn't expect this to be as serious and as they didn't expect the package that they bought for. We know that many of them will be horrified when they see what you and this government have done with the mandate that they gave you, and they will then stand to listen for future referenda and future other pieces of legislation, and indeed future elections, because they voted in good faith. People, when they go into the ballot box, they always do that. But we must have respect for the people, not only the people that elected us, but the people who elected other people and the people who voted for other situations. So I thank you, Controller, and I want to say that I look forward to debating this under the stewardship of Deputy Dr. Hartley at the Health Committee, and indeed back here on the floor. And hopefully they will have a meaningful and respectful, and we'll be able to have some amendments effected.
Thank you, Mattie McGrath.